Okay. So, good morning. So, today would be our last discussion day. And this would be our last module, which is AUDCIS Module 6, Information Security. First, we take a look at our learning objectives. So, number one, we describe the importance of information security to organizations and how information represents a critical asset in today's business organization. Number two, discuss recent technologies that revolutionized organizations' IT environments and the significance of implementing adequate security to protect the information. Number three, discuss information security threats and risks and how they represent a constant challenge to information systems. Number four, describe relevant information security standards and guidelines available for organizations and auditors. Number five, explain what an information security policy is and illustrate examples of its content. 6. Discuss roles and responsibilities of various information system groups within information security. 7. Explain what information security controls are and their importance in safeguarding the information. 8. Describe the significance of selecting, implementing, and testing information security controls. And lastly, number 9, describe audit involvement in the information security control examination and provide reference information on tools and best practices to assist such audits. So, throughout the years, organizations have experienced numerous losses which have had a direct impact on their most valuable asset, which is information. So several organizations have experienced attacks which resulted into stolen information. So most of the time, information is directly hit through by computer viruses. So based on a report by McAfee Labs, which is one of more popular antivirus software. So in its report, they predict the following. So attackers will continue to look for opportunities to break traditional, non-mobile computer systems and exploit vulnerabilities. Attackers are well able to exploit information systems whose firmware, which is the permanent software program into a read-only memory, either controls input and output operations or constitute SSD, network cards, and Wi-Fi devices. So they continue on to attack what we call zero-day vulnerabilities. These types of exploits are probable to show in common malware attacks. Next, more popularly, what we call ransomware on mobile devices will continue its growth, even though attackers will likely to combine these mobile device lock attacks with others, such as credential theft, which allow access to bank accounts, credit cards, etc. There are also information losses coming from white collar crimes, from fraud and economic crimes, such as accounting schemes and self dealings by corporate executives. So we will be discussing about the importance of information security to organizations and how information represents a critical asset in today's business environment, especially we have or what we call the information age. there is petabytes of information generated every second in the internet. And of course, not information would be crucial or beneficial to companies, but of course, all information collected by the company should be protected by the organization. I say no. So information represents a critical asset in many organizations today. Without reliable and properly secured information, organizations would most likely go out of business. So your information would be to be able to be used properly. We should be able to properly secure it the same way we secure our company assets, especially since we can't always see information or our information assets isn't always visible to the eye, so it makes it more difficult to protect since we can't always detect them. So not unlike cash, you can always monitor by your bank account, or if it's in your petty cash box, you can always see who has access to it. But with information, it's critical to determine who owns it, who uses it, where it goes, and where it is stored. So the preservation and enhancement of an organization's reputation is directly linked to the way in which information is managed. So maintaining an adequate level of security is one of several important aspects of managing information and information systems. So your systems should be designed with security to integrate with existing security architecture. So effective implementation of information security helps ensure that the organization's strategic business objectives are met. So we have three fundamental objectives for information, which can be abbreviated as CIA: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The first one, confidentiality, is the protection of information from unauthorized access. So we must ensure that the information is only accessed, especially for what we call personally identifiable information, or PII, that only persons with authorized access can use the information or can access the information. So this is important in maintaining the organization's image and complying with privacy laws. So a possible risk associated with confidentiality includes information security breaches, allowing for unauthorized access or disclosure of sensitive or valuable company data. Next, integrity, which is the correctness and completeness of information. So this is important in maintaining the quality of information for decision making. So a potential risk associated with information integrity includes unauthorized access to the information system, which of course with their access they can corrupt or result to corrupted information and fraud or misuse of company information or systems. Lastly, availability refers to maintaining information systems in support of a business process. This is important in keeping operational efficiency and effectiveness. So possible risks associated with availability include first disruption or failure of information system, unavailability, loss of ability to process business transactions, mga downtime, being offline, and crash of information systems due to sources like catastrophes, viruses, or sabotage. So with the expanded computer use, has resulted in serious abuse of data communication systems. So computer hackers and sometimes mga disgruntled employees can use the organization's data communications to tamper with organization's data. They can destroy information, introduce fraudulent records, and steal assets within touch of a few keys. So the following are some of the techniques used to commit the cyber crimes, which are threats to information security. Number one, spamming is usually a disruptive online message, especially commercial message, posted on a computer network or sent via email. So a common occurrence is just via the email, mga useless information or newsletter, which spams or floods your computer mail inbox. So yung mga legitimate concerns or legitimate emails are covered up or spam by these uh, useless messages. Next, phishing. This is a high-tech scam that frequently uses spam or pop-up message to deceive people into disclosing their personal information. For example, credit card numbers, bank account information, social security numbers or passwords, and other sensitive information. So internet scammers use the email bait to fish from the sea of unsuspecting internet users. So this can also come as smishing, which uses text messages or SMS messages, or wishing, which uses phone or voice. So this happens when usually you receive an email or a spam. It will usually get a very important subject or a subject that will evoke your action. For example, your bank credit card is blocked. So when you see that, it takes when you are rushed or forced to take an action, and then the email would contain a link to a somewhat similar website, similar looking bank website. Tapos kukunin nila yung credit card number and other information. Akala mo it's legit website, but it's just a website operated by the attackers or criminals. So yung information mo is not really going to the bank, but to the perpetrators or attackers. So this is just a warning to, especially for everyone. The banks won't usually ask for these details. They just need sometimes just your credit card number or your name, and it's enough for them, for real banks, to determine the status of your account. They don't need anything else. So exercise caution in dealing with these items. But usually, if your credit card will be blocked or your bank account will be blocked, they will seldom use email, especially in the Philippines. They usually use phone calls or SMS. Okay. Next, spoofing. So spoofing is creating a fraudulent website to mimic an actual well-known website run by another party. Email spoofing occurs when the sender address or other parts of an email header are altered to appear as though the email originated from a different source. Spoofing hides the origin of the email message, so it can be a part of the phishing attempt as described earlier, or sometimes when you are going to a legitimate website, you get redirected to a spoofed website, especially if madaling ma if madaling ma-mistype yung website ng isang company. For example, let's say you intended to go to um, kunyari your classes are in online.feu.com. For example lang, this is your Canvas site. So, dyan ka nagla-login, you put your username, your password there. But for some time, the other users or new users might not be familiar with the actual address. Baka ilagay nila fauonline.com. So some spoofers or perpetrators can take advantage of this parang human nature to do incorrect items or incorrect things. So gagawin nila, they'll mimic the original website so that when you get your input your username and password, they can get your credentials in order to hack your original uh, website or the original account. Next, farming. So farming is a method used by fishers to deceive users into believing that they are communicating with a legitimate website. So farming uses a variety of technical methods to redirect a user to fraudulent or spoofed website when the user types in a legitimate web address. For example, one farming technique is to redirect users to a fraudulent website when the user types in a legitimate address. Next, denial of service attack and distributed denial of service. So the DOS attack is an attack designed to disable a network by flooding it with useless traffic. So a variant of the denial service attack can be shortened as a DOS attack or a DDoS, denial of service, distributed denial of service attack. It uses a coordinated attack from a distributed system of computers rather than from a single source. So it often makes use of worms to spread to multiple computers that can then attack the target. So sa DOS, this is usually a result of uh, other malware. So some computers which are infected by the malware becomes a part of what we call a botnet, which does the distributed denial of service. So for example, you cannot access a website. It's being flooded by different or random logins or random illegitimate service requests so that yung mga legitimate logins or legitimate access requests, it cannot go through because the system is being overloaded by the current number of requests. Next, viruses, Trojan horse, worm, malware, and spywares. So viruses is a piece of program code that contains self-reproducing logic, which piggybacks onto other programs and cannot survive by itself. So the viruses is usually one of the common terms used to describe Trojan horses for malwares and spywares. But of course, as time passed by, we have more accurate terms for the other types of the viruses. So next we have a Trojan horse. So this is a piece of code inside the program that causes damage by destroying data or obtaining information. Worm is an independent program code that replicates itself and eats away at data, uses up memory, and slows down processing. So usually this three, this just makes your data inaccessible or useless. So yung target niya lang is your data integrity and availability. However, malware, which is a malicious code that infiltrates a computer, it is intrusive software that the purpose of damaging or disabling computers and computer system. And spyware, which is malware installed without the user's knowledge to surreptitiously track and or transmit data to an authorized third party. So this also attacks confidentiality of information because once malware or spyware is active, the perpetrator or attacker has consistent access to your computer system. So your confidential data or information is readily accessible to them. And lastly, botnet. If you become infected by a malware or spyware, you become part of what we call a botnet. So this is a network of remotely controlled systems used to coordinate attacks and distribute malware, spam, or phishing scams. So bots, which are short for robots, are programs that are covertly installed on a targeted system, allowing an unauthorized user to remotely control the compromised computer for a variety of malicious purposes. So these are the techniques used. So let's take a look at the sources of cyber threats. Number one, criminal groups. So groups of individuals or entities that attack information systems for monetary gain. There is an increased use of cyber intrusions by criminal groups. Next, the sources of what we call state-sponsored attacks. At one point, siguro from Google or Yahoo, if you're using those email, you'll receive something like you are being targeted by a state-sponsored attack. So this is usually a threat or risk posted by foreign nation states. So foreign intelligence services use cyber tools as part of their information gathering and espionage activities. So several nations are aggressively working to develop information warfare doctrines, programs, and capabilities. So such capabilities enable a single entity to have a significant and serious impact by disrupting the supply, communications, and economic infrastructures that support military power. So for example, ng foreign nation states, very popular yung there's been news that Russia affected the US elections, the previous one, not the recent one, or how North Korea sponsored the attack towards the Bangladesh Central Bank. And examples. Next, hackers and activists. Both are hackers, but hackers sometimes crack into networks for the thrill of challenge or for bragging rights into the hacker community. So actually, we have two types. We have the white hat hacker and the black hat hacker. So you white hat usually they just do it for the challenge or to report bugs or system vulnerabilities within the target system. So pag na-hack nila, sasabihin nila sa organization. While yung black hat would be use this vulnerability to their advantage. So while remote tracking once requires a fair amount of skills or computer knowledge, hackers can now download attack scripts and protocols from the internet and launch them against victim sites. Now, because of the accessibility of all information, you can parang do it on your own by searching a few things within Google or the internet or some dark web forums. Hacktivists or hacktivism refers to politically motivated attacks on publicly accessible web pages or email servers. These groups and individuals overload email servers and hack into websites to send a political message. So a popular hacktivist group would be yung tinatawag natin anonymous. Usually they deface government websites as a form of hacktivism. Next, disgruntled insider. So the disgruntled insider is working within an organization is a principal source of computer crimes. So insider may not doesn't need a great deal knowledge about computer intrusions because they may access sila within the inside of the target system. So this can also include mga contractual personnel. And lastly, terrorists. So terrorists or terrorism seek to destroy, incapacitate, or exploit critical infrastructures to threaten national security, cause mass casualties, weaken the economy, and damage public morale and confidence. Okay. So terrorists may stay focused on traditional attack methods, but it anticipates growing cyber threats as more technically competent generation enters the terrorist tracks. Any questions so far? Wala. Moving forward. Next, we have information security standards or guidelines. So this provide a framework for implementing comprehensive security process and controls. Usually, it's difficult to, of course, it will be difficult to implement a comprehensive security process and controls. So we refer to standards and these guidelines in order to have a better coverage of all risk and threats uh, that may exist in the organization. So we have COVID, the ISO IEC 2702, the NISC, and others. Let's discuss one by one. So COVID, we have already discussed a few times in the other chapter. So this helps organizations meet today's business challenges in the areas of InfoSec, regulatory compliance, risk management, and alignment of IT strategy with organizational goals, among others. So this is an authoritative international set of generally accepted IT standards, practices, or control objectives designed to help employees, managers, executives, and auditors in understanding IT system, discharging fiduciary responsibilities, and deciding adequate levels of security and controls. So the focus of COVID is, of course, matching IT strategy with the overall business strategy. And the focus is the presence of control objectives. Next, we have ISO 27002. So this is a global standard usually used together with ISO 27001. This provides the best practice recommendations related to the management of information security. Management of information security. The standard applies to those in charge of initiating, implementing, and maintaining information management systems, or ISMS. So this usually includes full business impact assessment, network audit, information security policies, disaster recovery, management presentation, and IT terms and practices. So usually this has what we call a certification program that will improve enterprise security, have more effective security planning and management, partnerships, and e-commerce, and will bring enhanced customer confidence, more accurate and reliable security audits, and of course, when you have better information security or management of information security, you have reduced liability. Last one is NIST. So NIST is mostly US based. This is a government agency in the US which focuses on providing measurement criteria to support the development of pivotal forward-looking technology. So NIST standards and guidelines are issued as FIPS for government-wide use. NIST develops FIPS when there are compelling federal government requirements for IT standards related to security and interoperability, and there are no acceptable industry standards or solutions. So if there are no information in COBIT or ISO, we can refer to items in the NIST. And lastly, we have others. So other sources can be the Information Technology Infrastructure Library, or ITIL. So yung ITIL, usually the focus or the only focus or is information security. Sorry, the focus is service management or information technology operations. PCI-DSS is with card services, debit cards, credit cards. So standards covering credit cards. And lastly, the Cloud Security Alliance for those items covering cloud computing. So this isn't a catch-all for information security standards, but these are the items or major items that is usually those used to become part of guidelines for information security policy. So according to the SANS Institute, the term policy refers to a document or a set of documents that summarizes rules and requirements that are usually point specific, must be met, and cover a single area. So in order to create a good information security policy, we have to answer several questions. So first, ano ba yung pinoprotektahan natin? What information is critical to the business? And with that critical information, who creates this critical information? Is it the customer? Is it a department? Is it the system? Who uses that information? And next, what would happen if critical information is stolen, corrupted, or lost? And lastly, How long can the company operate without access to the critical information? So information security crosses multiple areas. The information security policies must be coordinated with systems development, change control, disaster recovery, compliance, and human resource policies to ensure consistency. So, for example, it should state web and email usage ethics and discuss access limitations, confidentiality policies, and other security issues. So the Science Institute also develop information security policy templates, and they write for the following items to be a part of the policy based on different categories. So first category is the general information security policies. So this would include acceptable encryption, acceptable use, clean desk policy or unified desk policy, data breach response, disaster recovery plan, digital signature acceptance, email, ethics, pandemic response planning, password construction, password protection, security response plan, and end user encryption key protection. Next, network security, which includes information security policies covering areas of acquisition assessment, Bluetooth baseline requirements, remote access tools, router and switch security, wireless communications, and wireless communication standards. Next, server security, including information security policy templates covering areas of database credentials, information balance standards, lab security policy, server security, software installation, and workstation security for health information protection or HIPAA policy. And lastly, application security, which includes information security policy templates covering the area of web application security policy. So information security policies are also helpful for organizations when documenting information classification, designation requirements. So in order to protect information properly, we have to classify them first properly. Just like the audits, we must first define the audit universe. So the same way, in order to protect the information, we must know what are we protecting and how much protection with the different types of information we have. Does it need protection? How much protection? So if an information is sensitive, so pwedeng top secret, pwedeng very confidential. So usually it's just for two things. Merong public use, merong internal use, and top secret. Those items or categories. Sometimes from class A, first, class B, and class C information. Sometimes they can use levels like level 1, 2, 3. If it's level 1 or level 0, it's highly confidential and for those eyes of those included only. While 3 or 4 or 5 is for general use or can be released to the public. So if information is sensitive or confidential, mga 0, A, or top secret, from the time it is created until the time it is destroyed or declassified, it must be labeled or marked appropriately. Okay? Very important, syempre, as the secrecy or confidentiality is higher, dapat mas obvious yung markings towards it. Pag general use or wala nakalagay, it is understood that it is for general use. Now, to determine yung classification, there should be it comes from the roles and responsibility of persons within the information security. Now, there are four people: the owner responsibilities, the information custodian, the user, and the third party. So first one, the information owner, which are usually department managers, senior management, or their designees within the organization. They bear the responsibility for acquisition, development, and maintenance of production applications that process information. So all application systems information must have a designated owner. And for each type of information, owners designate the relevant sensitivity classification, designate the appropriate level of criticality, and define which users will be granted access, as well as approve requests for various ways in which the information will be used. So the information owner will decide for most of the items that you can do with the information. Next, information custodian. So custodians are in physical or logical possession of either organization information or information that has been entrusted to the organization. So each type of application system information must have one or more designated custodians. So these are responsible for safeguarding the information, including implementing access control systems to prevent inappropriate disclosure and making backups so that critical information will not be lost. Custodians are also required to implement, operate, and maintain security measures defined by the information owners. Next, users. So users are responsible for familiarizing themselves and complying with all policies, procedures, and standards with dealing with information. So questions about appropriate handling of a specific type of information should be directed to either the custodian or the owner of the involved information. Lastly, third-party responsibilities. So access to information from third parties need to be formally controlled. The use of contractors, outsourcing, third parties will have to need to access the organization's information. There must be a process in place to grant the required access while complying with the rules and regulations. So usually it would have what we call a non-disclosure agreement signed by the third party that defines responsibility for the use of that information. A similar process should be in place when individuals in the organization have access to third party information. Any questions so far? Moving on to second to the last topic. Now we have discussed the threats and the risks to information security. What can we do, or what controls can we apply? So there's vulnerability management, threat management, trust management, identity management, and incident management. So in today's organizational culture, most information security challenges are being addressed with security tools and technologies such as encryption, firewalls, access management, etc. Although the tools and technologies are certainly an integral part of organizations' information security plans, literature argues that they are not alone sufficient to address information security problems. To improve overall information security, organizations must implement ISC, or information security controls, that satisfy their specific security requirements. So there must be a vulnerability, threat, trust, identity, and incident management process. So let's try one by one. First, vulnerability management. So vulnerabilities are weaknesses or exposures in IT assets or processes that may lead to a business risk or a security risks. So a vulnerability management process is needed to combat these specific risks. So this will include the identification of a vulnerability. Next, the evaluation of this vulnerability. And in part, what we call risk management. And lastly, remediation of this vulnerability. Usually, this is part of a what we call the TVRA, threats, vulnerabilities, and risks assessment. Speaking of threats, threat management is usually includes virus protection, spam control, intrusion detection, which is monitoring a network for malicious activity or policy violations, and security information and event management or SIEM. Usually, companies would have what we call a cybersecurity operation center or SOC, which runs 24/7. Depending on the industry, they would have 24/7 cybersecurity operations center. This is true for banks, mga e-commerce websites. They usually have their own CSOC. So they protect the company from, they monitor intrusions, they monitor attacks, the networks for any threats. So they can also use SIEM, which is an approach to security management that combines security information management and security event management. So they provide real-time analysis of security alerts generated by applications and network hardware. Usually, pag may mga admin access, merong pumasok na unknown actor sa firewall or sa network. Next, trust management. So trust management includes encryption and access controls. So encryption technologies electronically store information in an encoded form that can only be decoded by authorized individual who has the appropriate encryption technology and authorization to decrypt. So encryption provides a number of important security components to protect electronic information such as identification. So who are you? Are you uh, are you the intended recipient of this information? Next, authentication. Can you prove who you are? Usually there would be a password to decrypt the information. Next, authorization. What can you do to the information? Can you see it? Can you print it? Can you copy it out of the document? Next, auditing. What did you do? There would be logs or there would be additional information on what did you do to the document or to the system. Integrity, is it tamper proof? Can you tamper with the decrypted or the encrypted information? Privacy, who can see it? Only you ba? Or there can be others who can see it. And lastly, non-repudiation. So can I prove that you said what you said? So hindi siya mapagtatakpan, non-repudiation. When information is encoded, it is first translated into a numerical form and encrypted using a mathematical algorithm. So the algorithm requires a number of messages called the key to encode or decode that information. The algorithm cannot decode the encrypted information without a decode key. Next, identity management. So it's the process used to determine who has access to what in an organization. So automating usually identity management should be automated so that there is reduced manual process and potential for human error. There is improved management reporting of user access rights. There is ability to enforce segregation of duties according to business rules. Automatically revoke access rights of inactive employees, and audit trail of requests and approvals. So integrating these systems with a common identity management program can be costly and time consuming. But of course, it will be better so that your SOT and confidentiality of information can be protected. Lastly, incident management. So security incidents such as malfunctions, loss of power, communication services, overload, mistakes by users or personnel running installations, access violations, and so forth have to be managed and dealt with in accordance with a formal process. So the process has to apply to all forms of security incidents, and incidents have to be identified and recorded, reported to a focal point, prioritized for action, and analyzed and acted upon so that the incident won't happen again. Or if it happens again, mm, the company can respond properly in a faster or a timely, more efficient manner. Question so far? That is information security controls. Next, usually, of course, we have controls. We need to be able to test controls. However, companies seldom test these controls. This is because some leadership are not providing clear expectations for the assessment of controls and or testing schedules. The organization are not aware of the importance of these controls, and there is an inadequate oversight of risk management program. And as this types of controls usually require a certain level of skills, there can be a lack of skilled test manager and testers or security assessors. So I'll gumastos ng company for outsourcing, and of course kasi pag nag-outsource ka, that can be an additional vulnerability. And lastly, leadership pressure to condense the testing cycle due to schedule having higher priority than the security of the system. So there should be a proper test plan. There should be a list of applicable security controls, a test plan encompassing all of the applicable security control, a test report, and mitigations for any failed controls. So sometimes our audit would include a testing of these information security controls. But most of the time, if you are if you can review, these are all processes. So our testing could include walkthrough lang and test of controls within the processes. Questions so far? Hey, questions? Okay, lastly, involvement in security audit. So here are the following common audit objectives of information security audit. So we'll be ensuring that the security configuration of applications, databases, networks, and operating systems is adequately managed to protect against unauthorized changes to programs and data that may result in incomplete, inaccurate, or invalid processing or recording of financial information. And effective security is implemented to protect against unauthorized access and modifications of systems and information which may result in the processing or recording of incomplete, inaccurate, or invalid information. So, to ensure that effective security is implemented to protect against unauthorized access and modification of systems and information, so control activities would be testing, usually presence of training programs, the system owners authorizing user accounts, and the nature and extent of their access privileges. Users have changed role of tasks, have their responsibilities and access revised or transferred, and that transmission of sensitive information is encrypted, consistent with security policies and procedure to protect its confidentiality. So that concludes information security. You have any questions? So information represents a critical asset in most organizations today. Without reliable and properly secured information, organizations would not last long and instead may quickly go out of business. Information security helps ensure that organizations' strategic business objectives are met. Especially now, information, for example, your personal information would be risked in a certain company. Of course, your personal information does not really change. It's more permanent. Your address, your name, your birthday, your parents' name, etc. So, if it leaks in a business organization, your name or your personality or your identity would be at risk forever. So information security control is a very important thing, especially for the personally identifiable information. A very important thing to be considered by organizations, and of course for us, the owner of the information, or as persons, we should be able to take care of our personal information. So kung hindi kailangan, do not provide your personal information. Your public profiles in the internet, especially sa social media, as much as possible, do not provide your information. Or kunyari sa Facebook or sa Twitter, kung pwedeng i-hide or pwedeng hindi mo i-provide, do not provide anymore. That ends Module 6, and this is the end for auditing in a CIS environment course.